I'm Dr. Christopher Barker, and I'm a New Jersey licensed clinical psychologist, and welcome to Holding Space. Today we have a guest, and we are holding space with, I hope I pronounced your name right, Lisha Antiqua.
Yes.
Good, I got it right. I used to tell people when I was teaching, I'm from the South, and people had very ordinary names there, but up here people have more ethnic names. I'm sure I'm going to mangle your names, but try to forgive me.
I'll
I've
pronounce it
gotten some
right for
practice.
everybody.
I loved reading your bio sheet because I usually have people fill out a bio sheet when they are interested in appearing with me here, and you talk about the deepest wounds of childhood sexual abuse is not only the trauma itself, but the identity that forms around it. And my God, that really hit a bell because that is so true. I've worked with dozens of people who have experienced sexual abuse, either as children or as adults, and it really does change you. And not just memories of the event, but who you are, the things you look at, the things you feel, the things you do. But I'm not the expert. So why don't you tell me more about it?
Yeah. So, unfortunately for me, I grew up being sexually abused. And when I hear my students and clients' stories, I think mine wasn't so bad. And then I remember, it's not a competition. And I feel like so often that's what other people think too is like, oh, well, it wasn't so bad. It was only once, or it was only a couple times, or, it, you know, it, it only happened at a party. And yet, that one time, if it happened many times, it was many times over, right? But if that one time was enough to just change a person, and it really boils down to the fundamentals of what I'm calling the creation wound. Because when we really look at not only the psychology of how somebody is abused and what happens there and that, then we look at the nervous system and epigenetics and how things happen there and things are messed up. But when we look at energetically how things shift too through our bodies and through our vibration, sex is what created us all. And it brought us into this world. And when it's demonized and weaponized against us, I found that it does something much different to the whole body and identity system, which I teach on and help people reclaim. And so, it doesn't have to be a really bad story to count. I think that's my first message here when it comes to sexual abuse. It's a special kind of abuse. I think that's why they use it so often when trying to control people, be it the elites or people in church. And it happens in these really odd places when it comes to trafficking, right? There's usually somebody in power that we hear about on the news.
Mhm.
And I think it happens there because it's one form of abuse that very quickly can completely dismantle the power of somebody's relationship with themselves.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, that is what we see time and time again with survivors who are coming forward. I was working with a woman some time back who just had one experience with someone, and he exposed himself to her when she was like 3 years old. And, but it informed, she still wasn't entirely sure what happened. She wasn't entirely sure even if it happened, but she had a number of hangups that were sort of like almost delusional in content about people watching her and people looking at her and the things that they were thinking about her. And again, that one childhood experience hit just right so that she carried it throughout life. And she was able to eventually start seeing like other sides of things and find other aspects of herself that were good. I mean, that's the kind of the way I work is like finding moments of safety. And if you can take that one moment and if we can extend that a little bit, but it's so hard. And it's so, like you said, when the people who are in power or the people who are influential are sending that kind of message about it or about the survivors themselves, and how can you feel good about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. That's why it really begins with the relationship with self. And I always say with especially with trauma, I mean, you're a therapist, like like when we're dealing with trauma, trauma amnesia is real. Thank God. Thank God. And
Yes,
where I really take my degree and everything that I've done and kind of say, okay, this is the gap. I think that in our system right now, as people working in mental health and psychology and with trauma, that there's a big gap in recognizing that a lot of it doesn't need to be remembered. The nervous system needs to be reset. If we look at somatic healing, that's really important, but it needs to be accepted. And they've done research in not hospitals, in prisons. And they did research in
same
prisons.
thing sometimes.
Yeah, same thing often. Yeah. With people that were charged incorrectly, right? And over the course of these charges, they were made to believe that they actually did this, usually was murder. I think in this study that I'm referring to is like that they actually committed it. So they were gaslit into believing that they committed it. And then later, DNA evidence, other evidence came forth and acquitted them. And then people would come out and they'd be like, but I did it, but I did it. I'm so confused, but I did it. And polygraphs, they would test, right? And they were like, why is this happening? Because we know for a fact, like he wasn't there, he didn't do it. And it was, I think it was mainly men. I remember reading just part of the study. And I was just amazed because they were really convinced. The brain had convinced them that it happened. So whether you remember every detail and the body remembers it, or you just have an idea that maybe something happened when you were 2, 3, or 4 because you have a hang up like your client did or anything else, what really matters is well, if it did, if it did, and I just accept that it did happen to me from that place, because I obviously already survived. You're here. So let's just say, forget proving it, going back and searching your brain for it, looking for evidence. Like, let's just forget all of that because that can take years. It's a great moneymaker for our insurance companies, but it can take years. Like, what, what can we do from this point? Who do you want to be going forward if we totally accept that it happened? And when my clients do this, their PTSD tends to lessen or completely disappear too, because that if it happens again, how am I going to respond? Or I wish I should have acted this way in the moment. Reactivity in your nervous system and their nervous systems finally goes, oh, wait, I survived. Then the flashbacks go away and the rehearsing it goes away because the brain finally goes click, the amygdala finally goes yes, and you're able to go, okay, I survived. Now what?
Yes.
That's the big question.
Yeah, I identify with that so much because I do EMDR with people and there's a little too much. I do it a little differently and I don't really require that people have to relive the trauma because the reliving the trauma is essentially just working it into the brain a little deeper. Being able to, like you said, accept this possibility as a reality and go from there and reestablish who you are, reestablish what you have. And you're right. Once you sort of like overcome that hurdle, things start to go away. It's almost magical to see. And I think that really is the direction that we need to go in with this because you're right. Digging it up is not only a painstaking process, but it's a painful process. I have one guy
Yeah.
that I'm working with now who was abused and he keeps putting it off and forgetting sessions and things like that. And we haven't really gotten to it yet, but it's kind of like, he just really doesn't want to go there. I said, you don't have to. We can work around it. We can do whatever you need to do. But
I wish we could work around it. Like, wouldn't that be great if you actually could work around it? Because you can't. But he could say, you know what? I accept it happened to me. And I accept that because it happened to me, I think that I'm a loser. I think that I'm never going to be good for anything. I think that I'm stupid because it never should have happened to me. I'm thinking like this. And you know what? I am willing to let go of all of those assumptions that those experience let me go. And can we work on that in session? Right. And
Right.
that's the breakthrough that I'm seeing with people. And we go towards post traumatic growth, which is what we really want. One thing though that does happen, Dr. Christopher, is that everybody and that I've worked with over the years, as we start getting into acceptance and rebuilding the personhood, as they're ready, as they're physically safe inside their own skin, as they like their brains and they're safe inside their minds, as they're safe within their emotions and managing their emotions, or at least moving through their emotions, right? Managing in a crisis is like a but but they're not afraid of themselves anymore. They're not afraid of feeling anymore. Once that happens, then it's almost always their memories, the ones that need to, will come up. They'll wanna talk about it. They won't be avoiding it anymore, and it'll just be like, "Oh, I had a memory last night of my brother, uncle, sister, dad, mom, blah, 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 and I wanna talk about it now." I'm like, "Okay, let's talk about it," right? Or, "I want to do a hypnosis around it," or, "I wanna do some EMDR around it," or, "I wanna do some EFT around it," or, like, whatever it is for them. And they feel safe within themselves. And I think that's the difference between typical trauma therapy work that we've been doing since the 90s, right? Thank God we're doing something, right?
Yeah.
Like we weren't doing anything, so thank God we're doing something. And how you can really prep the nervous system and the mind and the emotional body, looking at them as three aspects of identity to to become a safe space, and then the memories can come up, right? And if it's coming up physically and they want to hurl, right, we do shake it off, so we do somatics, right? It's not all that mental mumbo jumbo. So tell your client, like, stop avoiding. Let's just pretend like it definitely happened, and look at, like, what are you making mean? Like, what are you really battling with? Right? Let's
Exactly.
assume that it did happen and you were sexually abused, and what are you making that mean about you? Right? For
Yeah.
me, I was dumb, and I was a slut, and I was an old soul, and all of this before I was 8. So I was like, "What?" Like, you can't
Mhm.
you can't do all of this stuff. And EMDR knocked me on my ass in my 30s the first time that I had it done. It knocked me on my ass. And I'm grateful that I had had so much therapy since I was 13 up to that point that it was like, whatever. And really, I was in a narcissistic relationship, and the therapist needed to stop trying to treat my sexual abuse and finally treat the relationship I was in. But I had not found a therapist that would do that yet. And so it was all my fault because I was abused and turned my dad in when I was 13. And so, we were doing the EMDR, and it totally rocked my world. It laid me out for a couple days. Luckily, I was prepared to, like, go through that nervous system shutdown and reawakening. But a lot of EMDR practitioners don't understand the somatics of that,
Right.
and they don't prepare their clients, and they don't have anything to put in. So it's just this open vessel. And what that does when you bring in that creation, holding space, right? That creation of our space, it can bring in the exact same event in a different form really quickly if you don't have, "I'm a good person," right? And I now have standards and I have now boundaries and I'm going to walk away from that too often. And that re traumatization is just so real. I think we need more
Mhm.
education about that in our field.
I think so too. I think we need to take a harder look at some of these aspects. And yeah, you're right. EMDR really can knock you down. It's I've had people come up with like dreams and experiences, and it's essentially sometimes experiencing of the trauma. And so a lot of times what we have to do is work with what it brings up and other relationships and that sort of thing. And you brought up a good point about, the abuse is one thing, but I'm involved in a narcissistic relationship. And that's something that a lot of people are talking about now too, is narcissism. And one of the things I talk about in my upcoming book, which I can say now because it's in past formatting and we're looking at cover design.
Me too.
I know, right?
I love
I've been
that
working
pic.
on this for a while, and it's like, finally, I can get it out there. But one of the things that we do talk about is how we sometimes will move towards things that are dangerous or things that feel familiar because it's what we know and it's all that we really know. And sometimes we can feel like that's all we deserve or whatever. But on a somatic level, yeah, it's excitement. But is that love excitement or is that terror excitement? What is that? And we let somebody else define us for us. And that that all too often happens, especially when you're kind of adrift.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why embodiment and identity I find is so important. My book is also 16 years in the making. 2010 is when it began, but it's the Amazing You method that I'm putting out. And it's called Into Me See, because there was too many things called Amazing You. So I was like, eh. But it's, what I found with my other work, Reclaim Intimacy, is like, you can't reclaim that intimacy if you don't have an into me to see. And so many survivors of sexual abuse don't know themselves. They know what their partner wants. They know what their abusers might have stolen from them or taken away from them or what they enjoyed, sexually. That we have hypervigilance along with hypersexuality or hyposexuality and that fluctuation of it. We have the lockdown fear, we have the PTSD and the CPTSD symptoms. Like, there's just so much there. And yet, when you bring into, well, who am I? And you break down what identity is to truly what our vessels are, right? So down to the DNA, like, this is our physical form. How do you take care of your physical form? Because what's right for Christopher to eat might not be right for Lisha to eat, right? And then we have the mental form and what shaped your mind, right? Some people have ADHD and autism and CPTSD. Whew, that's fun, right? So, 2, you get to learn how you think and work with it because it's just brain patterns. The other is a trauma response, right? And they all can look kind of mushed and similar, but it gets easier and easier and easier when you get down there, right? Now my ADHD is like, yes, I can do so much. Watch me do everything at once. Focus, focus, focus.
That ADHD, I love it.
Right? My dyslexia too. Like, I made it so wrong. And now I'm like, oh, I can read inside out and backwards and upside down. Doesn't matter. Just don't ask me to edit anything. But that said, right? As I healed my own trauma, like, the other challenges that might have been associated with those two brain ways that my brain just works, were all jumbled, right? And filled with story. And when I got to the other side of it, I was able to look at it and be like, oh, well, this is how I work with my dyslexia. One, you own it, right? You work with it. This is how I work with my ADHD or neurodivergence, whether it was placed by trauma and I just learned that because I grew up in the trauma mind, or if I actually have ADHD, I don't know if I'll ever know, but I know that there's definitely, right, some hyperfixation and some squirrel going on here. And those are the parts of therapy and stuff that we get to go into and you're like, okay, what was the trauma? What were my thoughts around it? How does it run my emotional body? Because we all feel differently. Your happiness and my happiness might feel completely different in the body. But
Right.
when you were talking about the terror, right? Is it excitement or is it terror? That underlying terror hum I remember one day, like, just waking up and being like, nothing's scary, but it's just there. I just live in a constant of emotional terror, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was journaling about it the other day. I'm just like, is it creating when we get into reality creation, right? That's a whole different subject, but is it creating things to be terrified at this micro level for me, even though my life is really great? Because that's what was normalized. I did grow up in a terror zone. I didn't know where my next beating was coming from, right? And I
Right.
married into some place where there was a lot of screaming and yelling, partly to my way of communication at the time. I had no idea how to communicate. The other piece was I married somebody that was hypercritical like my mother, and, like, right? And punishing, and didn't like me, quite frankly. And so in those awarenesses, though, that's where you get to feel. And when you can feel your feelings, you can go, oh, because I wanna challenge something. I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but I'd love to know your feedback. One thing that many of my clients, my survivor clients, have is they're really good at sadness and grief and shame and dismay and that terror, right? And anger. Anger is like they're great at anger, but then they hit that anger realm and then it's like back down to shame and they don't feel good. They rarely cross into what I call their shadow emotions, which is happiness, terrifies them. Joy terrifies them. Desire terrifies them. Pleasure, my gosh, their nervous system will freak out, run the other way, and pick a fight with somebody, punch them in the face, like, And so learning what normal, quote, whatever normal is, but like healthy people think, well, everybody knows happiness. I just want to be happy. My clients always say that I want to be happy. And I'm like, that sounds great. What's happiness? I don't know. Where do you feel it? I don't know. Okay, how are you going to know that you get there? I don't know, right? So training the nervous system, the mind, and the body to be safe. And I just got a $20,000 house loan, right? Excitement. I just bought my favorite car. I just met a really healthy, wonderful person, right? Like like all these, I just made the best job move to do that instead of bracing and running the other way because it feels scary and different, which is what they do, right? Then they're able to open up to these exciting emotions that feel a lot like anxiety, feel like fear because they've never experienced it, feel fear like that bracing because they've never had really good feelings in opening. So what? They lose the job. They don't get the promotion. They run the other way. They sabotage the house. They can't buy the car, right? To get them back into those lower emotions. So I just think it's funny because we always talk about teaching people their shadow emotions, but let's look at what really the shadow emotions are for a lot of trauma survivors.
That's great. And you're absolutely right. I agree with that. Frequently, I have worked with people who, well, actually, I was just talking to somebody yesterday and she had a really clear perception of what really good is and what really bad is, but she didn't comprehend the idea of the middle. So even being able to cross over between good and bad was like impossible for her. It either has to be handed to her as completely good and wonderful or really, really bad. And she had a lot more really bad than really good. And so finding out that there's a zone in which you can sort of like cross into that. And how do you get there? Where's the roadmap to that? Sometimes people just have no idea. And you're right, they wind up giving in to the sabotage. They wind up giving in to the running away. And the anger, really good point. That's something that I address in the book also is that, sometimes when you find yourself running up against these patterns, it results in anger and then you collapse into shame. And that's exactly what happens. It's like I can go just so far and then, but that's bad. No, not necessarily. Not
Yeah.
necessarily.
In David Hawking's work, the frequencies like anger's right here and desire's right here. They're right there. And then it goes into the love and, contentment and up to these great emotions, but anger's that tipping point, and that's why we can have righteous anger. But if you grew up in a battle zone and that's been normalized, or if you've lived in a battle zone fighting with your spouse for however long, then the body doesn't know the difference. Your mind is mush because that's CPTSD or PTSD, right?
Hmm.
And and you're like flailing and terrified of that. So that lower loop, getting stuck in that cycle. Right. So learning how to push yourself over and question yourself and, well, what do I want? It might take away from that anger because if you know what you want, you know how to set a boundary, you know how to ask for what you want, you know how to leave a situation that you don't want to be in because you get to admit what you want. Most of the time when we're angry, we don't know what we want, and that's when we freak out.
Yeah. The activation feels the same. Sometimes I compare it to dancing. You hear the music and you start moving and you find yourself doing some of the same moves over and over again. It's the same dance, but it's not necessarily the necessary dance. It's not the dance that you need to learn. Being able to be activated and be able to make a different response to it. See that it's not always bad when you're activated. Sometimes you can be activated for good things too. It's so hard to learn when you've had so much bad.
Yeah, it is. And so in the Amazing You method, part of it is emotional intelligence, and it's mapping out your emotional intelligence through the ways that you act. I am so sorry.
It's okay. I just
The
turned mine
ways
up.
the I don't know why that was there. The ways that you act, the ways that you feel, like what sensations you're feeling in your body, what pictures you're creating, and the state of being, that judgment that your mind makes, right? I am mad, I'm happy, I'm joyous, I'm sad, I'm miserable, I'm depressed, right? Whatever that state of being is. And we look at that and we run through these 4 phases of emotions and you map them out and kind of figure it for yourself. Like, how do you move through those emotions? And I found that my clients, once they have their map, which they have a lot of resistance trying to find their map, right? Like their ego is like, no, we can't do that. But once they actually do it, then they're able to move. Oh, I'm recognizing that like, I'm at numbness right now, right? So I'm gonna leap up and up. I'm in anxiety. Cool. I can go from anxiety pretty fast up to what do I want and into desire and skip through that and not be fearful of the anxiety anymore. And that process that I've been walking people through since about 2016 has been monumental at helping them just understand, like, you don't have to stay here. Like, emotions are fluid, right?
Yeah.
Emotions are fluid, and just like a baby goes from crying to happy in 2.2 seconds, so can we. But the mind attaches to it and the actions attach to it. And then we go into these perpetual neurocycles, right?
Right.
And so I think it's really important. I love DBT for that. Like when I went through my DBT training, it was like, oh, this is what they're using. I have that too. Then I kind of figured, well, yeah, good to have the certification. But but it was good, right? That there's
Yeah.
so much important on just like emotions are a big deal and they come with patterns and we all kind of have our set rings into those patterns and once you learn yours then you can move yours up. And one of my scariest feelings is just feeling accomplished, feeling like I did a good job. I remember
Yeah.
getting my dissertation, graduating with my doctorate, and one of my fellow students was like, "Why aren't you excited? Like, aren't you proud of yourself?" And I was like, "Wow, I'm numb." Like, I
Mhm.
was so scared to be like, "Oh," and I was just like, "Well, what's next? What's next? What's the next degree? What's the next thing?" Right? And not basking in that accomplishment because it's scary. And I think that's what a lot of us survivors, we miss out on. And being like, okay, well, I'm going to learn how to be happy. I'm going to learn how to feel accomplished and be proud of myself. I'm going to learn how to be excited. Yeah.
Chomsky talks about how we crack the code for language, that nobody can really sit down and teach a child how to form words, that they pick it up. And he thinks that we have an innate mechanism for learning language, but we don't have one of those for emotion. In order to have emotional intelligence, we have to have an emotional vocabulary. And that means that we have to have good attachment patterns, and we have to have somebody who's there who can say, you fell down, you're crying, are you hurt? And then you say, oh, yeah, that's the word for hurt. Okay, I understand now. But if you haven't had good interpretation of that, if you haven't had somebody who can like really finally differentiate those things, if you haven't had good feedback, and again, attachment, a lot of things that feed into that, we just don't always know. We know activation and we know something's happening. And if we've had more experience with bad than good, then we're going to go with bad. At
Yeah.
least that's the way I see it.
Yeah. I'd agree. I would agree. That's one reason why when Chris Parker and I created this method through other people's wisdom and, a bit of our own to walk people up their scale in these four massive phases based kind of on David Hawking's and work and kinesiology and frequency and toning and emotional, like all the words and actions of how people act when they feel. Like we put it all together to try to give somebody their map because if they're born being gaslit, right? You're not allowed to be sad. I'm going to give you something to cry about. Don't you cry, right? Like anger and screaming at you is love. Oh, I'm doing this because I love it, right? It's like all of that twisting and turning, it distorts our first language, which is really emotion, right? It's our first way of communicating is through coos and tears. And
Hmm.
so how to do this is really outlined in a beautiful way to help you just go, oh, this is my own language. And I think that everybody really has to study their own. It's like diet. We can't all eat the right way. That's why there's a bazillion diet nutrition books and methods because everybody's body is different. Everybody needs different things. You get to know your own body. You get to know your
Yes.
own mind and you get to know your own emotions.
No, that's really valuable. Before we run out of time, is there any messages you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just love to invite everybody to, if you feel called, if what I'm saying like resonates with you, I have a beautiful gift that helps you practice this safety and this embodiment. And it's called Safe, Secure, and Successful. And you can get it in the Unstoppable Confidence Club. And it's just at my website, lishaantiqua.com. And let me know that you are here from Holding Spaces and I will open it up for you. All you have to do is get into Unstoppable Confidence and text me and say, I'm here from Holding Spaces, and I will open that gift up for you. And it's just a practice to start being in your body,
Mm,
noticing your mind, noticing your emotions, and noticing your etheric field. And then noticing that you are none of those, that we are a soul having a human experience and you get to hold
exactly.
space on words, like, you get to hold space really for you, and I think that's our ultimate job and expression here.
Mm, it is. That's great. And there will be a link posted below. And I really thank you so much for being here today. I'd love to hear more about this. And as more people start experiencing your work, if you want to come back and talk about things that you've learned and things that as we grow, because we always are learning and growing if we're doing it right.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Thank you
Even
so
in
much for the
failing,
work you
we're
do.
growing, right? Thank you so
And
much, Christopher.
thank you. And like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. And always feel free to come back. And thank you for holding space for us.